Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Three Shaved Heads. So, we're here for another week. Hello Sam, hello Keith, how are you?
Hello, very well, thank you.
Good, thanks.
Very good, very good. I've had an absolutely shattering week, I have to say.
We didn't ask you.
Well, all right. Well, you tell me
How are
how
you,
you're...
Graham? How are you?
Thank you.
Have you had a hard week?
It's been a hard week. It has been a hard week. I've had a lot going on. But I felt it was only right to ask you how your week was first.
That's very kind of you. We still don't care about your week.
So today we've got a special guest on. Hi, Daphne. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
Very good. And we are very excited. We're very excited about this because I think you're the furthest guest we've ever had on the show.
We've gone international here, haven't we? This is amazing.
We totally have. I mean, I was excited when I looked at the podcast stats and I saw someone in Iran looking at our podcast or listening to our podcast. But you're even further. You're even further than that. So I'm very ecstatic about this. But so do you want to introduce yourself, Daphne?
Sure. So I'm Daphne Bourne. I am by way of Sydney, Australia. However, I know my accent is probably a little bit confusing. So I'm originally from the States, and I've just come back from 2 years in a big bank in New York City, which unfortunately had to come to a early close because of COVID, sadly. So I'm back in Australia, a much safer and healthier place than Brooklyn, New York. And I was doing design operations over there, which was an awesome role. And I can tell you all about it. And now I've got a new job. So I'm kind of like you, Graham, where I'm just exhausted after the first few weeks of work, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. It does take it out of you when you are starting a new role. You've got so much to learn, so many people to meet. I think I've been back in meetings for the last 2 weeks, just meeting people, and it was a lot of note taking.
We're making it even harder for you, Daphne, by expecting you to get up at 5:30 a.m. after a tough couple of weeks.
No, it's okay. I was doing New York hours before when I first got back to Sydney, which was just crushing me. So getting up for like 2 a.m. leadership meetings, and it just wasn't sustainable. So 5:30 is not too bad.
To be honest, I imagine the podcast will make you immeasurably famous, and you'll never need to work again. So it's probably going to be worth it.
That was my goal.
I mean, the reach of our podcast is impressing me every week. But great. I spoke to Daphne. When was it? A few weeks ago now. At least maybe a month ago, and we immediately had some quite exciting conversations about DesignOps and some of your experiences. So it'll be interesting to get into that and talk a little bit more. But before we do, we're missing something, guys. We're missing our drinks. So.
I'm
Sam,
certainly missing my drinks.
Yeah, I know you are. I think you should tell listeners why you are missing your drink.
No, I'm gonna save that. But I have a beer tonight. I have Brewdog Nanny State, which is an alcohol-free beer.
Yes.
It's terrible in every way. So let's move on. What are you drinking?
Enough. Me. So in honor of Daphne. I've got a breakfast stout.
Oh,
because it's breakfast.
Very good.
Actually, I could argue that mine is because it's a very hoppy ale.
Oh,
This is just going to go on and on.
Do you get it?
I love it.
Yeah, I think I've got it. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna mute now. I'll go.
I actually haven't tried mine yet, and I'll try it whilst Keith talks about his beer. What are you on to tonight?
I've
Keith?
got a beer that is appropriate for two different reasons. The first one being that it's by Yeasty Boys, who have breweries in both the UK and Australia, New Zealand as well, but we won't talk about them.
Yeah.
But secondly, listeners will know there's been an awful lot of tea drinking on this podcast, mostly from Sam. So, in honor of Sam's tea drinking, I have an Earl Grey IPA.
Very nice.
And it's called Gonna Matter. And the tasting notes are: it's boldly floral, much like your granny's bedroom.
Can I just say, there's a Gunnamatta Bay just down the street from me.
Oh,
So
really?
you're hitting home. That's amazing. I
Wow.
love that. Yeah.
Excellent.
See, look, this is the effort we put in for our amazing guests.
So I'm gonna open it and give it a try. Let's have a go.
You're such a poser.
Yeah, that's nice. It's 6.5%. It's a strong beer.
Ooh,
And has it got those floral notes that you get in Earl Grey?
Yes, and your granny's bedroom.
Lovely, lovely.
It's a good beer. I like that. I gave that about a 4, I reckon.
But it's by
Great.
the Yeasty Boys. Is that
Yeah.
right?
That's right, Yeasty Boys.
Again, the Beastie Boys, one of my all-time favorites, and I got to see them in Brooklyn. So
Did
I
you?
feel
Oh.
like, yeah, I feel like you guys have gone all out today. Thank you. Is this all about me or what?
Yes, for one night,
Definitely.
it's all about you. So, Daphne, what are you drinking tonight?
All right. Well, I know you can't see my mug, but I'm drinking out of my lucky Manchester property mug that I got when
Wow.
I spoke at the DesignOps Summit a few years ago in Manchester. And I'm drinking, so I thought I'd go really like proper tea here. So I'm drinking a Taylor's of Harrogate Yorkshire tea. It says proper black tea on the front, so I feel like that's legit. And it's actually got, the HRH stamp of approval at the top too. So I'm not
Oh,
messing
wow.
around. Yeah.
Yeah, you've gone all Brit on us.
That's
Mhm.
awesome.
Fantastic.
Respect.
Yeah, respect for that. Fantastic. So cool. We've got the drinks out of the way. So Daphne, the reason we had such an exciting conversation was around design ops, and it's one of those terms which I see bounded around quite a lot in job specs and on
Yes.
blogs and on LinkedIn posts. And I'll be honest, I didn't really know what it meant.
Mhm.
So can you tell listeners, you probably the same as me, maybe all of them know it and I don't, but can you tell people what design ops is?
Sure. Gosh, this is where your editing is probably going to come into play because I'm sure there's a faster way of saying this, but it's the practice of, I guess, supporting design teams, whether it be through process or efficiencies or even just the health of the team. So it can also be advocating or evangelizing for design within a big corporate structure. So sometimes a design operations manager can also be the glue within a product design org that may not really understand the function or the practice of design and kind of just think of them as painting pretty pictures or putting a button on this, as we used to say. So design ops can also really help sell in the practice all the way up through to your heads of product or even your executive levels, because they kind of bring in that I guess that business knowledge to the design practice and help them kind of get a seat at the table. And that's probably one of my favorite parts of design ops. But our team was pretty was a pretty good example of kind of a well-rounded design operations function where we had people that looked after the people ops side, which is, like your talent management or performance management. So making sure that your designers were developing in their careers, that they were happy in their roles, that they understood what their roles were. Also that we had like a healthy recruitment process. So we had some consistencies around hiring. We also had a function that looked after your design spaces. So making sure that designers had the right tools, that they had spaces for collaboration, that they had just space in general. Pre-COVID, making sure that the offices had the right sort of fit outs or places for your introverts to go away and work were also really important as to bringing together the cross-functional team and having a space for design to whiteboard or to showcase work. And then my area, which was mainly around kind of portfolio management or process. So a lot of times we would be focusing on things like agile transformation. So helping the design team use tools that could connect them back to the rest of the business so that they weren't working in a silo. And by tools, I mean things like the dreaded Jira or
Mm.
Confluence,
What
or ways.
do you mean? Jira is the best tool ever. I will die on this hill. Sorry,
I
carry on,
know.
please.
No, it's true. It's true. It's a hard sell, but there's a lot of pluses to getting design into Jira, and I could talk about that for days. Um, so it's really this understanding of what the design team needs to function at their
Mm.
best, and to also kind of reduce the noise for them to just get on and design the best way that they can. But yeah, it's a role that I've seen in, or I've held in previous organizations that have kind of just called me a design manager, which can also
Mm.
be a little bit confusing because sometimes design managers are, well, most of the time they're expected to still create or deliver artifacts or wireframe and design, as well as kind of keep the wheels on operationally. So helping track and plan and prioritize the work while also being a designer themselves. So adding in the operations part to the title really kind of helps distinguish between the two. And it was only until I went to Capital One where I did see that design operations as a proper practice that was really, I guess, defined separately away from that design manager role.
Mm. So would you say that design ops is kind of the opposite of the old agency model?
Yes, it is, and I think it's born out of the era of when big corporates decided that they needed an in-house design function.
Okay.
And you'll remember the days of like Fjord going into Accenture. Capital One
Mm.
is another example where they bought Adaptive Path, which was a huge and very famous UX firm in San Francisco. Um, and they kind of just gobble up these really well-known, well-respected design organizations. And you can't just sort of plug and play them in there. You need to sort of help them blend into the business and give them sort of those shared languages so that they can work effectively with engineering, with business analytics, and with product, whom they may not have been working closely with because they've been in that studio environment where you're maybe
Yeah.
a little bit more protected.
It's siloed. Yeah, absolutely. And I and I think there are, I guess, a lot of preconceptions about working with other teams. And of course, this podcast is all about cross-functional working. What were some of the sort of big challenges you had on getting those teams to kind of partner with each other?
Oh, um,
And that's probably a book for you, isn't it?
yes. No, it's one of my favorite things to talk about because it was one of my greatest learnings at Capital One, which was
Mm.
sort of starting in the role. I was just excited to understand, almost like if I could take the roof off the top of the building, how did work come in and flow through the business, right? So, who briefed in who? Was it just somebody chatting over Slack to a designer and that was it? There was, just a quick little, hey, can you look at this screen for me type of thing? Or was
Yeah.
it sophisticated and had a prioritization process and went through a pipeline framework and things like that? So I spent the first few weeks really trying to understand our product partners, listening to sort of their feedback about how design was working for them or how it wasn't working for them, learning from our engineering teams if I was allowed to talk to them. They were very protected species. And I spent a lot of time looking outward because I thought, well, this design team I'm coming into of about 85 people, these guys are like ex adaptive path, like they know what they're doing. Oh my gosh, I don't need to come in
Mm.
here and kind of show them the double diamond framework, right? Um, so I naively, yeah, just expected them to sort of have this kind of I guess, relationship already sort of cemented it, because they were so impressive to me, and they had this legacy, and I kind of just made an assumption, which is wrong. And what I did was I spent a lot of time evangelizing the design team back into these business partners or these engineering partners that I was talking to, who were saying, look, we don't really know what design's up to, and sometimes they can be a blocker, and they're not really part of our process,
Mm.
and we don't know how to engage with them or when to engage with them, so we kind of just leave them to it. And so they had this really kind of strained, distant relationship. And I was like, yes, this is what I'm good at. Like, I love bringing this three-legged stool together, right? Like the leg of engineering, the leg of product, and the leg of design, and kind of building this sturdy stool to work together. So here was my opportunity, right? And I did, and I worked with this one particular product manager to build a workshop, to start prioritizing some work that was coming in for the next quarter. And they thought, let's get design in the room. They can help us start doing some design thinking that you keep saying that they could do. Here I was, like, trying to evangelize the design process, and we do user research and prototyping, and all this good stuff that actually they hadn't been doing. So what happened was, they spent a lot of time getting the right people in the room, doing all this great work, getting the data ready, kind of doing their homework. And they invited design to the table, which was great. And I was in there, and they brought in their particular designers. So a senior UXer and a visual designer. And once it was kind of design's turn to talk, or to facilitate, or to sort of jump in and kind of lead the problem solving, they just weren't ready. They didn't have they weren't on the same page themselves, the design
Interesting.
team. They kind of had their own ways of doing it, but it wasn't they weren't sort of singing from the same hymn sheet. They didn't have this cohesive language to sort of go in and say, right, team, this is what we need, this is where we're going to start. It was a really disparate, disconnected experience, and I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even look inward and realize we weren't ready. Like, we didn't have the language. We didn't have a seamless process, or it doesn't have to be a perfect process. We just didn't have something to fall back on to say, this is how we work, or these are the first steps that we traditionally take, Mr. Product Owner. And it was a real moment for me to realize, you need to make sure that your design team is ready for those moments where you're asserting them in, or negotiating them into the process.
So how does the role differ then from a project manager's role? So I can think in roles in the past where I've worked, some of the things you've mentioned, I've relied on a project manager to do or to help out with when working on a particular product or project. So where's the difference? What's the difference between design ops and project management?
I think you do get a lot of project managers coming into design ops, because they do have that sort of discipline or that structure about them. So they understand how to plan, track work, break down work, understand requirements, and they can help guide the design team in that way. So that's absolutely a natural thing to think of, that it sounds like project management. I think where design operations can kind of differ is, you also do get a lot of designers that come into that role because they just love systems, or they love the efficiencies, or they love scaling teams. So maybe they're looking at how to build the best design team, and how to sort of make the best skills work together. They also might come in with a better understanding of the design process, so that they can help build those shared languages like I was just talking about. So they understand the double diamond. They understand, I guess, the things that designers need to be able to work at their best. So they sort of have more of that empathy when they're coming from the design background. Not that project management doesn't. I mean, if you look at my background, it's very varied, coming more from, like, your suit side of the agency roles.
Yeah.
Maybe those old traffic managers, kind of production managers, that type of coordinator type of role really suits kind of a design operations function. But I think they have more of that kind of understanding of what designers actually really need in those spaces where they are either siloed because they're in a product design organization in an in-house situation where maybe they need Macs, maybe they need big plotter printers, or they need Mural, or they need they don't want to work in Jira, they want to work in Trello, and you need to be able to kind of explain why. So I think having the why for the design helps a lot in that role for sure.
It's interesting. I think you touched on the word language, and I think often when you just throw these teams together and they haven't been working together for a long time, they actually don't communicate with the same words, and they can't understand each other. The labels, the terminology, the things that they are, their concerns, their pain points, they're so diverse, so different. And bridging that is, for me, the biggest challenge. Trying to bring people in alignment so they are sharing the same goals, so that they are working together and using the same language. And it's such a big challenge. So absolute respect for you for taking on that sort of challenge. It's one of the hardest things to achieve. What I'm kind of interested in, because I know Adaptive Path fairly well. I went to a couple of their conferences in Amsterdam, and I was wowed by that agency. They were ideologically probably the most perfect design agency I've come across. I wonder how the implementation of some of those ideals in Capital One, given that they acquired Adaptive Path, did they kind of land, and did they work in an environment which is probably fraught with hierarchy and politics, etc.? How did it land, and did it work effectively?
To be fair, I sort of came in maybe about 2 years after that whole acquisition, and they had a very strong culture that was absolutely respected and welcomed into the business for sure. I would say, if I was out in the San Francisco team, they may not have felt the integration as much. Capital One's headquarters is in Virginia, and I worked in our New York office. We had a Chicago office, we had a Plano, Texas, and Adaptive Path was mainly based out of San Francisco. And they really had kind of their own space and amazing, beautiful offices, and really this kind of community that everybody wanted to be involved in. So they were welcomed. I have to say, we imploded with talent because people wanted to work with all these Adaptive Path folk, right? So Capital One grew from maybe 300 odd, 400 odd designers to they're now a 600 odd design org. They're very large. And I think Adaptive Path was able to shine. I think their systems and their tools and their methods, and Jesse James Garrett, actually have a photo of me singing karaoke with him on like my third day there, and I feel like it was a rock star moment. And they did lead a lot of how design was going to function at Capital One. So they weren't sort of off in a corner. They really were building the right way to have this design practice within the company. I don't think we got maybe high up enough in that C-suite that I kind of thought we were when I joined. Everybody says, "Oh, it's now a design-led company," and I thought, "Okay, cool, wow." So we must have a seat at that kind of C-suite executive level. We didn't really get that far. They did really infiltrate the company to the point where in Capital One's onboarding, where you have like bank tellers and folks in security systems and all sorts of different roles. Part of the onboarding had a design thinking exercise, which blew me away. I was like, oh, wow. learning about the company meant you actually had to learn what design thinking was and what that skill was. So that to me signaled a lot of success with adaptive paths merger for sure. So you did sort of see it trickle in, but they I wouldn't. So hard to say because they definitely didn't last as long as I thought they. I think they made kind of like a good 3 years there, and the likes of Kristen Skinner, who wrote the book Design for Design Orgs, which is like my Bible, and I carry it everywhere and reference it all the time, and I encourage anybody to go out and get it. She was the one that built the design operations function at Capital One. And I unfortunately didn't get time with her there. Our times did not cross over, and she came from Adaptive Path. And so some of those real legacy folks didn't really stay on as long as I wish they could have. And I know Jesse kind of finished up maybe mid to the end of last year. So they got a good 4 or 5 years in there. But
it's pretty good, yeah.
It is pretty good. But I will say, that moment that I was explaining to you earlier, that story, I sort of would have thought our product partners, our engineering partners, maybe would have kind of understood design a little bit more at that point. And you know what? That could have just been because it's such a big company and I was only in one line of business, which was the consumer bank. There's AI and there's credit card and there's commercial. So there's so many different parts of Capital One's product org that didn't maybe didn't have that same pain point, and maybe they already did have that language because their design team was smaller. I mean, we were about 80 to 85 people, so maybe having that traction within a product design organization of around 3,000 folk, that's engineers, BAs, product people, maybe that's just too hard, that ratio. So yes, it could be a numbers game.
So for a product owner or product manager like me, if an organization takes on design ops, or if I join an organization that is already got design ops embedded, what difference would I notice in terms of how I interact with a design team on a daily basis? I mean, I think about typical things where I get frustrations, like user testing might be taking a little too long and it's getting a little too close to the start of a sprint where we're supposed to be working on a particular bit of functionality or feature, things like that, where this kind of flashpoints can happen. So what difference would I notice if next week I started a new job in a design ops organization?
I think you would see things like you would see design systems probably bedded down and in a healthier place. You would see design tools that are hopefully not disparate and all over the place, so people are hopefully working a little bit more efficiently and effectively and have better control of quality. You might see intake of new projects being a little bit more succinct and more seamless. So hopefully they would have that engagement model down. That's kind of what DesignOps helps with as well. So understanding what type of information you need. Maybe they would have helped create a ritual or a cadence for that ritual with that cross-functional team. That I spent a lot of time doing that. So maybe you would say, "Oh wow, your design operations person, has you guys working in dual track agile. Does that work for your model?" It depends on how embedded that design ops person is. Like for me, I would go into small teams of 5 to 8 folk and spend about 3 months with them and kind of observe them for a few weeks, then give them a little bit of a diagnosis and then implement, depending on whatever that design director wanted. So it could depend on what the pain point is. If for you're saying the pain point is, not really working to, I guess, the same speed, or they're taking too long, or they're not communicating properly why they're taking too long, or not really giving you a better idea of what they need. that would really be where that design operations person could come in and either facilitate. Like we did a lot of pilot work where we would facilitate. Let's take this cross-functional team and see how we can help them operate better. So we would do like a Jira pilot with them where we would say, let's for the next 6 weeks, all try to work on the same rituals. So design, you're going to come into grooming. Engineers, you're going to come into, or maybe just the tech lead, you're going to come into some of our early discovery type of workshops and really try to involve each other in those kind of rituals or ceremonies. And then through that awkwardness of like, ugh, this is good or this isn't good, sort of pulse check that. And then at the end, be able to say, right, okay, we don't need to have a stand up every day. Or tech, you don't need to come to these types of workshops. Or tech might say, oh my gosh, I love coming to those workshops. That's helped me so much. You need that sort of person in the middle, that vanilla, that kind of mediator to not be biased to any party and really see where those efficiencies lies and where those collaboration points are the most effective. So I think you would be able to talk to that design operations person and say, look, here's where I'm struggling with design. How can we find a better place?
Got it.
And then they would be able to kind of hopefully pilot it, which I think is kind of the best way, or maybe restructure some of their rituals or take a look at their process and kind of break it down. Understand, what user testing methods they're using. Is it something that's, we could do something quicker, like use some quick online testing platform to get quick results, or no, do they need this particular type of user testing and why? So the design ops person can hopefully be able to translate those needs a bit better or help the design team translate that better back to their product manager.
So is it almost like having a scrum master or agile coach, but just for the designers?
A little bit, okay. Yes.
Yeah.
I would say that they can function like that. And I am wary of saying that because a scrum master can definitely be way more specific than design ops. I find that design ops can sometimes have to be this huge generalist with things like I was saying, they have to get the design systems and the hiring and the agile and the prioritization. And, they're trying to do all of those things. Whereas a scrum master can be a little bit more specific.
So when you're kind of working with cross-functional teams, often the thing that they often say about the design team is, oh, you're going to be in too late, or you're going to be too early, or something on those lines. And for me, when a team says something like that, you're almost enforcing, knowingly or unknowingly, a waterfall way of working. And the lovely thing you were saying about there is how suddenly they will just chip in and come to those user testing sessions or come to those QA sessions or whatever it is. They'll start to kind of join forces and start to observe the kind of activities they're doing. And for me, that sense of interest is really important. That sense of, oh, how does this whole end-to-end process work? I think some of the big problems I've noticed in some of the organizations I've worked in is the allocation of designers or developers, sometimes product managers as well, can be flat out. You go from one stint of activity onto the next, and then by the time you're working on the next project, the designers are working on another project. So you become fragmented and split up, and all of that cohesion that you built up completely lost. Have you got any kind of tips for people who may be in that kind of scenario but want to move towards design ops? What kind of thing? Where would you start for kind of getting back into that kind of cross-functional way of working?
Oh, that's a good one. I'm going to sip my tea for a minute while I contemplate.
Please do.
No, tell me a bit more. So when you say, so somebody who's wanting to go into design ops to sort of fix those pain points.
Yeah, so maybe someone's coming in, maybe they've been hired at a slightly more senior level than perhaps the original team is, and they want to change and put into practice some of those design ops ways of working. But of course, the allocation profile of developers is that they will be working for a stint on this project, and as soon as they're done on that project, when they finish coding, they're on to the next one. And of course, that means that you're not aligned. You're not working on the same things. Now, if you were to say to some of those, for example, heads of engineering, say, well, hey, can we have the engineering person in early in some of our workshops and some of our user testing? They would say, well, no, they're allocated on another project.
That's right. This is like the age-old thing. When are you allowed to bring in the right people at the right time? It is a really tough one. I've had to sort of choose those moments wisely. Like I said, in previous companies, I haven't even been allowed to talk to the engineers. There's like, I'm only allowed to talk to the scrum master, or the tech lead. And I think you do have to be really purposeful with when and why you're. Oh, I hear Santa.
I can hear the cat entering the room.
I heard the bells.
I'm going to jump in because I've been pretty quiet.
Yes, sure.
But we should stop talking about design/product people being told that they're not allowed to talk to engineers. We should stop talking about that like it's normal. Because I think, in a lot of companies it is, but in a lot of companies it isn't. And I'm willing to suggest that probably if you look at the success of various companies in kind of modern technology metrics, the companies where the engineers are allowed to freely talk to the designers and the product people and are allowed to get involved in all elements of kind of product discovery, investigations, ideation, very early stage stuff, they produce better products.
100%. Well, you've just built that empathy together, right? You can listen to what each other are on the hook for. You can say, oh, okay, wow, I didn't realize engineering is on the hook for speed or security or fraud. I didn't even think about that. Right. As a designer, you may not have that empathy or understanding for the things that are really driving them every day or the things that keep them up at night, and vice versa.
But also, engineers have good ideas. Like, I think that's underestimated in a lot of companies. When you kind of internally outsource your idea creation to just the product team, and then maybe the product team outsources how it looks to just the design team, and then it gets bundled up and handed to the engineers to just build. That's the worst. That's the worst thing you can do. So so why are so many companies doing it that way?
I think it's a time to resources thing. If I think about why I wasn't allowed to include them, it was because they were so highly measured on their productivity that, do you remember the pilot I was telling you about where we were trying to create this sort of little guinea pig cross-functional team and kind of measure how they worked in Jira together and how they worked in their rituals? We had to really beg, almost borrow and steal a team and for this pilot, and explain that the outcome of this and the goal of this is to work better together, is to find a better way of working as a cross-functional team. And we're not going to disrupt the engineering process, because that was the bit. So we had a large agile structure, and the agile team was so worried that if design started kind of meddling, and these are stereotypes, but they're exaggerated for the story. Don't ever let that ruin a good story. If design sort of started meddling in the engineering process, it would throw out all their metrics. It would throw out all their reporting. And those metrics and reporting were so highly sensitive to the head of product and the head of engineering to understand their resource allocation and their funding, that there was this real fear of people's time. So I think that's where it was born from in previous places I've worked. Yeah.
So I get it. And every engineering manager is on the hook for making sure they're not wasting money, and making sure they're getting value for money. But I would argue that, and I know you're not arguing against this, but I think I'd say, actually, if you're just using your engineers to write code, you're getting incredibly bad value for money out of those guys, because they're normally expensive, they're intelligent people, and I'd argue that from my experience, most of the kind of genuine innovation within ideas, maybe not the concept of the ideas themselves, but the innovation comes from those engineers. And you can either choose to have it at the beginning when you're testing viability and de-risking your ideas, or you can choose to have it forced upon you at the end when the engineers come back and say, well, why didn't you do it like this?
Yep.
So I don't understand why more companies don't think that way. But I guess that's the reason we've got this podcast, right? We need to change the world.
And you've kind of brought up one of my favorite words in this practice I have, where I'm trying to bring that three-legged stool, the engineering, the product, and the design team, to be able to co-create together as early in the process as possible. Because you're absolutely right. Everybody can add to the problem solving space, to add to the intent creation space. And there's a tool that I used at a bank in Sydney, and that I took to Capital One with me, which gave me a ton of cut through in this really product led organization that I was in, where product set the prioritization and product set the work that we did, and engineering and design were kind of just told. And to sort of change that model, I tried just literally implementing a lean canvas into the process. And I know everyone's going to go, oh yeah, lean canvas, I know. But what we did was we said, okay, let's try to use a lean UX canvas right when we are getting our, the product manager is getting sort of their next set of features or their next set of work, right? And we haven't defined it yet, and we kind of have an idea of what those things need to do and who for and why. But let's all get into a room and start to kind of put some kind of framework around them. So we use the lean canvas in a way where early stages, we would bring in a tech lead, we'd bring in a designer, and we'd bring in the product manager and maybe a BA. And I would run an hour to an hour and a half long workshop with them, where we go through the lean canvas together. And I wish I could have a visual. Oh, damn you, podcast. Shakes fist in air. Where we would step through the canvas in such a way where you'd start with the customer value proposition or the problem statement. And then your next step would be, and I would literally have a timer, and I would spend the next 5 to 10 minutes mediating the team through the customer space. So what do we know about the customer? What are the problems we know already? Do we have some data? Do we have some user research that we've already done? Or do we have some old user research and now we think, oh gosh, we need some new research? Spend some time in there. That's kind of the desirability section. And then move into the viability section, which is a little bit more around, okay, what's the hypothesis that we have here? What are the things that we want to validate? And also, what are the metrics that we need to measure? Are we trying to reduce the cost, or are we trying to improve a conversion rate? And usually your product owner, this is kind of their sweet spot, right? This viable section is usually what they can bring to the workshop. Desirability area is usually kind of the design sweet spot, everything to know about the customer, to champion about the customer. And then at the very bottom is the feasibility section, which goes through what are all of the dependencies and the complexities, or the risks that we have to think about with some of the solutions that we've just kind of jotted down at a very high level stage. And again, this is super high level. This is just early stages, but it's getting that three-legged stool together early in exactly the way that you said. Bring those engineers into the room for this conversation. They've probably never been in this type of, I don't know, workshop with the designer, with the product manager. And maybe design's never been in this workshop because it's usually product just solving it in a silo. And it was a really great moment to, we used to print them huge up on and then tack them up to the wall. And then I'd make people sort of physically stand up near them. And we'd use kind of the Post-it method. So, you don't always have the loudest person in the room answering all the questions. And then having a design operations person, or, in other places that may not have that function, maybe it's a project manager. You need that kind of mediator, that sort of unbiased person to help keep the team focused, because everybody just wants to jump into the solution space as well, because that's kind of like, it feels more comfortable there, right? Like kind of in these other awkward areas where it's like the ambiguity and the unknown is not really comfortable, but it's really pushing the team to kind of sit in that problem space longer, and then allowing the tech team to be able to say, guys, this is sounding really either complicated, expensive, or maybe not the best way, maybe not the best way. What about this? And it allows them to kind of help steer that feasibility really early, so that, like you said, 6 weeks or however long down the line, tech's not given this solution and saying, we can't build this, or, this is not how I would have done it. And they have that moment to be able to feed into the whole process.
So I'll loop back to something that we talked about right at the start, which is making sure that we're using the same language, because I know, look, I've worked with Graham for a while. Okay, I know he likes his process and this kind of thing, but when you use some of
models,
the words,
not a process
models, whatever, this is kind of my point though, because when you use words like, let's sit in the problem space, let's ideate, let's think about it, those words turn engineers off. Most of the time they turn engineers off. How do you deal with that? How do you
Fair. No, that's a really good point. You need to get better at it. You need to be called out. You need to, it's so hard to say you need this, but you need that psychological safety to be able to say that to one another. And I think part of DesignOps role is also helping to create that psychological safety. So having that person to be able to mediate and say, hey, tech, does that word, do you understand what that means? Or, hey, design, do you understand what that, because engineering might use words that design has no idea, or even product has no idea about. And product love to throw around acronyms. And I used to create like a parking lot to the side of this whole thing, and jot down things that people had questions about or wanted to solution, or acronyms, or things that were kind of weird. And you're right, finding that language and not having that exclusivity in using design terms or engineering terms is absolutely part of the process.
It was something interesting in what you were saying, Sam, because we used to laugh about this, didn't we? We used to joke about the fact that I would say certain words and you would say certain words. And I think there is something in that, right?
It was mainly you.
Mainly me, probably. Honest. I mean, I thought I was always trying to be deliberate not to use those words where I could. But of course, when you're using a model for the first time, you're a bit more rigid about it. But after a while, it becomes a little bit more loose. So, for example, design thinking, if you think about the double diamond, I don't need to tell people we're being divergent. I just say, this puts more options down there. And that's a much more obvious way of talking about things.
I guess this is a plea from me to everyone in your world. It's just tell us what you mean. We're simple folk in engineering. We know our stuff, but we don't want to get distracted by the language. We love solving problems, right? That's kind of what we do, and we like solving them with other people as well most of the time. So let's just use kind of plain language and focus on the problem we're solving rather than the process. And I know that kind of goes against what we're talking about here. In the whole design ops is thinking about the process, but I think I'm saying it's more important not to care about that process and to just focus on the problem, right?
I think you're bang on. Meaning, part of design operations is also to create that environment where you're having inclusivity in the conversation. You're having inclusivity in the process and in how you work. And inclusivity is absolutely not using language or terminology or acronyms that exclude parties from one another. So being able to be sensitive and aware of those moments for the different disciplines is crucial, and is something that it takes practice. You need to get better at it. But if you can, as a design operations manager or as anybody, can help build that psychological safety so that you do feel comfortable and you do feel okay to call each other out on that, is also really important.
There's something interesting because I think it isn't always, this isn't obviously doesn't always land with the engineers, but often design can be the worst problem because sometimes we just want to sit behind a desk for 9 to 5 hours and design great stuff. Why would we negotiate to product managers and engineers? We just want to design really great stuff for our users. So that can also be a big problem to overcome within a design community, that somehow we need to find out how to be more inclusive and how to work and partner with other teams.
I mean, is it kind of the case that design ops, you've succeeded if no one notices? Is that a true statement?
Yes, that's how I would sort of know that I was ready to move on out of the different teams, because I had so many teams to look after. I knew once they were, running their stand-ups and flicking through Jira without me and writing their stories and signing up for design reviews. I knew when they were able to just, when those wheels were greased and they were moving along on their own, then I could just pull myself out. You're absolutely right. It's like you want to do yourself out of a job. It's the same thing as a scrum master. All of a sudden you're not really needed anymore because everybody's just getting on with it, right?
So does that mean it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time role for an individual? It could just be a bunch of people in product UX and engineering kind of heard about this thing called DesignOps and they want to give it a go, and they can try and build some of that into the daily operations of a team without there being a person dedicated to it.
I think what happens is the wheels do start to fall off and people start to cut corners and people stop showing up to that meeting because they think, well, we don't really need that meeting anymore because we're just getting on with it now. So then the curve kind of starts to flatten a little bit, right? Unless you have a really, really good design manager who can take all the tools and take all the process and the efficiencies and the insights and be able to champion that. And you need that advocate. So if you do have somebody that can kind of be your partner or your advocate and I guess implement and kind of keep that healthy process going, then yeah, you might kind of focus on different things. But the cool thing about the design operations person is they, like I said, I kind of, and again, I wish I had this Venn diagram that I could show you. Darn it. Where you can flex out of that, maybe that program management or portfolio management space. And now you can flex into the practice space, which is, what are our design reviews look like? So as soon as the team started, working really effectively with Agile and their systems and process and tools were all humming along, then I kind of started to look at, okay, how are we communicating even internally as a design community? So you can't forget also about how they connect back out to maybe their wider design org. So sometimes that would happen because we were so embedded in these cross-functional teams, we would almost forget to go back into the design community and share and learn and support one another. So design operations was also a nice little link back into the rest of the design org, where we would look at how are we sharing? How are we passing on new tools? We used to have this thing called What's Up Thursday, which was an hour long to an hour and a half long lunch where the entire 600 design org would all Zoom in together. And it was military run. It was amazing. There were people that were actually like producing the content every week and hosting it. And there was like a soundtrack, there was like a Spotify playlist that went for What's Up Thursday. And it was so cool because it was a moment for the design teams to go, oh yeah, we're part of this like bigger, it was called One Design, this part of One Design org and community where I can learn about AI. And I don't really work on AI, but like, oh, how cool is that? Or I can learn about all the other things that are happening across this wider design org. So even if your team is high functioning within itself, I think it needs to to get back to the rest of the community for that insight and that knowledge and that kind of inspirational tap that they get with the rest of the community.
You're so right. I mean, I've worked in teams where they are very efficient at working within cross-functional teams, but they forget about the foundational layer of design. And sometimes that can be the design system or the things that are supposed to be consistent, and they're not. So I wonder whether there is a tipping point where you have enough designers to do design ops. Would you say that's true?
Yes, there's definitely ratios. I've been to design ops summits where they look at the ratios of design ops people to design teams and designers. So there's definitely like a sweet spot for all of this as well. So that you don't overcook it and that you don't undercook it. And I guess I've just been really lucky to have been in such a large organization to be able to kind of flex and scale and takes things that are small, like a little pilot, and then be able to grow them across 85 odd people. But now I'm at a startup where it's just me, a UI guy and a UXer and 5 engineers. So I'm in like a totally different environment now.
Yeah.
And I'm not even a design operations manager anymore either. So but it's the same principles, right? It's the, like you said earlier, Graham, it's the connectivity, the kind of glue in between everything, and making sure that we're all aligned to the same kind of goals.
So there must be some parallels with DevOps. I mean, I'm
Yes.
not close to DevOps particularly. I've worked in businesses that have DevOps teams, and Sam, you probably know that world better than I do. But from a slightly outsider's point of view, it feels and sounds quite a lot like that.
In that a lot of people say they do it and don't actually do it. Is that because I think if you have, and I'm going to be self-critical here because I manage a DevOps team as part of my area, but I do kind of think this statement is true that if you have a DevOps team, you're kind of not really doing DevOps. With exception, if all the people in that team are developers and write code, then you are. But I don't know. It's an interesting parallel. I don't think we've got time to cover it, to be honest, because I would probably talk as long as we've already gone around that. So maybe it's a good topic for a future podcast.
Yeah,
we need to find a DevOps person. Yeah,
what is it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Does that mean I get product ops at some point in the future?
Is there product ops?
Yes.
There is. I've just Googled it.
There is actually. Do you know what? Because we actually started to scale our design ops team from 2 of us to now there's 9 of us in that current space. Our product partners started to look at what we were doing and said, "Wow, we need that too." However, product ops can almost kind of become like excuse me,
program management.
Yeah, or what's the word? You're gonna have to edit this out. But what are they called? Where they kind of work on the. Why is it escaping me? Is it because it's 6 a.m?
Probably, yeah.
You probably get a pass for that, to be honest. We'll put it in the bloopers.
The bloopers. They become kind of that pipeline kind of function of work, right? Like the delivery. What are they called? I can't remember the word.
It will come back to you after
It'll
this
come back to
podcast,
me.
I'm sure.
But anyway, yes, there is a product ops function, and they do work very similarly. Ours actually works on an education system, so like a product university in a way, to make sure that product is actually building product in the best way possible, so that they are, because you do start to get product managers and product owners from all over the world, and when they come in, they kind of just do it how they want to do it. So the product ops team has created almost like a little university where they just kind of bed in the foundations of product design and development and the process, so that they get more of that uniformity and that consistency in the way they build things.
Interesting. Awesome. Guys, I think we will wrap up. Thank you ever so much, Daphne, for coming on this show. That was a fascinating talk, and I feel like I know more about DesignOps now, which is great. Cool. So thank you, everyone who's listening. Just before we go, please subscribe to the podcast. We are on Spotify, we're on Apple, we're on Google. I think we're on many others as well. Castbox, I think we're on as well.
Are we on Amazon? Because Amazon have announced they've got podcasts now.
Have they really? I'll have to look into that.
Yeah.
I know. I think I was trying to get us on Pandora the other day, but I had a few problems with that. But I'm trying to get us on as many as possible. So yeah, please subscribe, and you will get obviously the follow-ups to this, and hopefully we'll have someone from DevOps on one of the future episodes to compare and contrast with this.
Yeah, I feel like I just want to make the point. We've not had any engineering guests yet. We need to step up on that front. No offense, Daphne, but I'm feeling quite outnumbered.
None taken.
I do feel bad for you, Sam, and we I promise you we will get engineering people on. In fact, I've got just the person who will be coming on soon, and should be quite an exciting person to speak to. Someone who interacts very closely with designers. Cool. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next. You're very welcome, and thank you for coming on. And we're really proud to have you all the way from Australia. Although it makes no difference in the online world these days, but thank you for coming on. And we will see you in the next episode. Thank you very much.